If I told you that your surname might be older than England itself, would you believe me? Not older than the English language, older than many of Europe's royal families, older than most castles standing across Britain today. Because hidden inside a handful of Irish surnames is something far more remarkable than a family name. They preserve the memory of kingdoms that vanished nearly 1,000 years ago. Not counties, not villages, kingdoms. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories buried inside British and Irish history, take a moment to subscribe to UK Bloodlines. Every week we explore the forgotten ancestry, DNA discoveries, migrations, royal dynasties, and remarkable family histories that shaped Britain and Ireland. And while you watch, tell us your surname in the comments. You never know, it may become the subject of a future documentary. Long before Ireland was divided into counties, long before Norman knights landed on its shores, long before English kings claimed authority over the island, Ireland was a world of rival Gaelic realms. Each had its own king, its own laws, its own poets, its own warriors, and its own history. Some kingdoms controlled rich farmland that fed entire provinces. Others ruled storm-battered Atlantic coastlines where foreign armies struggled to survive. Some became famous for producing high kings who dreamed of uniting Ireland. Others became renowned because they refused to surrender, even when every neighboring kingdom had already fallen. Most disappeared centuries ago, but not completely, because unlike castles that crumble or kingdoms that vanish from maps, surnames travel, they cross seas, they survive wars, they outlive empires. Today, millions of people in Ireland, Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and across the world unknowingly carry names that once belonged to families standing at the very center of Irish history. The remarkable part is that these names are not simply old. Many of them are among the oldest hereditary surnames anywhere in Europe. While much of medieval Europe still described people by their occupation or their father's first name, Irish dynasties had already begun preserving permanent family names that would pass from generation to generation for over 1,000 years. Imagine that for a moment. A child born today may still carry the same family name used by ancestors who lived before William the Conqueror crossed the English Channel, before the Battle of Hastings, before the Domesday Book. That continuity is extraordinarily rare. But before we go any further, there is one important thing we should make clear. A surname alone cannot prove that someone descends directly from a famous king. History is more complicated than that. Gaelic society was built around extended kin groups that expanded over centuries. Powerful ruling families attracted allies, followers, and dependent clans who gradually adopted the names of influential dynasties. Political identity often became just as important as direct biological descent, far from weakening the story. That makes it even more fascinating. Because these surnames do not simply represent individuals. They represent entire communities, entire kingdoms, entire ways of life. They preserve memories of places where generations lived, fought, worshipped, traded, studied, governed, and defended their homeland against wave after wave of invaders. In many ways, they are living pieces of medieval Ireland. And once you recognize the pattern, you begin seeing an invisible map hidden beneath the modern one. Suddenly, a surname is no longer just Kelly or O'Neill or O'Brien. It becomes Connacht, Ulster, Munster, Leinster, ancient frontiers, forgotten capitals, battlefields now covered by quiet fields where sheep graze without anyone realizing what happened there 1,000 years ago. That is the journey we are taking today. Not simply through surnames, but through an Ireland that no longer exists, an Ireland of inauguration stones worn smooth beneath generations of kings, of monasteries whose libraries preserved knowledge, while much of Europe struggled through political collapse, of poets who possessed enough authority to destroy a ruler's reputation with nothing more than carefully chosen words, of warriors whose names still appear inside manuscripts copied by candlelight nearly a millennium ago. Some of these dynasties changed Irish history forever. Others disappeared almost without anyone noticing. A few became so successful that modern genetic research still detects traces of their remarkable expansion today. Others left almost nothing behind except the surname itself. Which raises an extraordinary question. If these kingdoms vanished, if their castles became ruins, if their rulers disappeared into history, how did their names survive? The answer lies in one of the most remarkable stories of cultural survival anywhere in Europe. Because Ireland endured centuries of Viking raids. Then came the Norman invasion, then the Tudor conquest, then Cromwell, then plantations, then the penal laws, then famine, then one of the greatest migrations in modern history. Each generation had another reason to forget the old world, yet somehow the names endured. Perhaps that is why genealogy has become so important to millions of people today. Because discovering where your surname first appeared is not simply tracing a family tree. Sometimes it is recovering a kingdom. Our journey begins not in Dublin, not at Tara, not in Belfast. Instead, we travel to one of the wildest landscapes in Western Europe, a place where mountains meet the Atlantic, where thick mist rolls across dark lakes before sunrise, where stone walls climb impossible hillsides, and where even experienced invaders often found themselves completely lost. For centuries, this region guarded one of Ireland's most fiercely independent kingdoms. Its rulers became so closely identified with this rugged land that even today, nearly 800 years after the Norman invasion, their name still evokes Western Ireland more strongly than almost any other. Number 12 is O'Flaherty. The Gaelic form is O Flaithparte, usually understood to mean descendant of the princely ruler or bright sovereign. It is a name that perfectly reflects the family's position. The O'Flahertys ruled Ir Connacht, literally West Connacht, beyond Lough Corrib in what is now County Galway. To understand why this mattered, you first have to picture the landscape. Forget modern roads, forget satellite navigation, forget bridges and railways. Instead, imagine dense woodland stretching across the valleys where wolves still roam, wide bogs capable of swallowing horses, rocky mountains rising abruptly from narrow coastal plains, and cold Atlantic winds driving rain sideways across the countryside. Foreign armies could march into this region. Very few enjoyed doing so. The land itself fought beside the people who knew it. When Norman knights swept across much of eastern Ireland during the 12th century, they built castles almost everywhere they established control. Stone after stone, fortress after fortress. Yet beyond Lough Corrib, the expansion slowed dramatically. The deeper outsiders traveled into O'Flaherty territory, the more difficult every mile became. Supply lines stretched, roads disappeared, local guides became impossible to trust. The O'Flahertys understood something every successful kingdom eventually learns. Sometimes, geography is the greatest army of all. It allowed Gaelic customs, language, and authority to survive in Western Connacht long after many other parts of Ireland had fallen under foreign influence. The family's reputation became so formidable that later tradition claimed Galway's western gate carried a warning asking God to protect the town from the ferocious O'Flahertys. Whether every version of that story is literally true is less important than what it tells us. Their enemies believed it. That alone reveals how respected and feared the dynasty had become. Their story grew even more remarkable during the 16th century. One of Ireland's most extraordinary women, Grace O'Malley, often remembered as the Pirate Queen, married into the O'Flaherty family. Together, these two powerful Western dynasties stood at the intersection of Gaelic tradition and an Ireland changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Grace would eventually negotiate directly with Queen Elizabeth for herself. Few women anywhere in Europe could claim such an achievement. Yet even as politics shifted around them, the O'Flaherty name remained deeply rooted in the kingdom that had first given it meaning. If your surname is O'Flaherty, Flaherty, or one of its historic variants, your family name still points toward one of the last great strongholds of independent Gaelic Ireland. But while Western Ireland produced rulers whose greatest ally was the landscape itself, our next dynasty possessed a weapon far more powerful than mountains. They controlled something every king desperately needed. Without it, even victory in battle could eventually be forgotten. Without it, entire dynasties simply disappeared from history. Because the next family did not preserve kingdoms with swords, they preserved them with memory itself. The family was O'Dalag, known today as O'Daly, or simply Daly, and although they rarely wore crowns or commanded great armies, they possessed something almost every king feared losing: reputation. In medieval Ireland, history was not stored in libraries that anyone could visit. It lived in memory. It lived in carefully copied manuscripts. It lived in the minds of highly trained scholars who spent decades mastering genealogy, law, poetry, language, and history. Among the most respected of these learned families were the O'Dalys, one of the greatest hereditary poetic dynasties in Ireland. To modern ears, being called a poet may sound gentle, almost ceremonial. In Gaelic Ireland, it was anything but. Imagine entering the great hall of an Irish king after a victorious campaign. Warriors return carrying captured banners. Noble families gather around long timber tables while musicians fill the hall with harp music. Then silence falls as one man stands. He is not the king. He carries no sword. Yet every warrior in the room listens. He begins reciting the genealogy of the ruler before him, tracing his ancestry back through generations of kings whose names have survived because families like the O'Dalys remembered them. Every triumph is celebrated, every alliance recorded, every betrayal preserved. If the ruler has governed wisely, his name may be remembered for centuries. If he has failed, the same poet possesses the authority to immortalize that failure forever. That was real power. In Gaelic law, the Fili, the highest class of poets, occupied an honored position within society. They advised rulers, preserved legal traditions, safeguarded genealogies, and maintained Ireland's historical memory. Many trained for well over a decade before reaching the highest ranks of their profession. Their education rivaled that of Europe's greatest scholars. The O'Dalys became one of the most respected families within this learned tradition. Branches of the dynasty served powerful rulers throughout Munster, Connacht, Meath, and beyond. While kingdoms rose and fell through warfare, the O'Dalys often remained, carrying Ireland's memory from one generation into the next. Much of what historians know about medieval Gaelic society survives because families like theirs continued copying manuscripts while kingdoms collapsed around them. Think about that for a moment. How many kings do we remember today only because someone chose to write down their story? Without the hereditary learned families, entire dynasties might have disappeared completely from history. The O'Dailys remind us that Ireland's greatest weapon was not always the sword. Sometimes it was the written word. Sometimes preserving history required more courage than fighting for it. If your surname is Daly or O'Daly, your family name may preserve the legacy of one of Europe's oldest scholarly traditions, one whose influence reached far beyond any single kingdom. But eventually, even words become powerless without someone willing to defend the land itself, because our next surname belongs to the dynasty whose decisions changed Ireland forever. Not gradually, not over generations, almost overnight. One king's desperate attempt to recover his throne would trigger events that transformed Irish history for centuries to come. Number 10 is MacMurrough. The Gaelic form, MacMurrough, means son of Murchad, and for centuries the MacMurrough dynasty ruled Leinster, one of Ireland's wealthiest and most strategically important kingdoms. Leinster occupied the eastern side of the island, facing Britain across the Irish Sea. Fertile farmland stretched across its interior, while busy ports connected Ireland with Wales, England, and continental Europe. Wealth flowed through its markets. Merchants arrived from overseas. Kings competed fiercely for influence there because controlling Leinster often meant controlling Ireland's gateway to the outside world. Among its rulers, one man would become impossible to forget: Diarmait MacMurrough. History has judged him in dramatically different ways. To some, he became the king whose actions invited foreign conquest. To others, he was a ruler doing exactly what ambitious medieval kings had always done, searching for allies to recover his kingdom. The truth, as so often happens, lies somewhere between those extremes. In 1166, Diarmait lost his throne after being driven from Leinster by rival Irish rulers led by Ruaidrí Ua Conchobair, the High King of Ireland. Exiled from his homeland, he crossed the Irish Sea seeking military assistance. Eventually, he secured support from experienced Norman knights, among them Richard de Clare, remembered today as Strongbow. Picture the moment. Small ships appear on Ireland's southeastern coast. Armored cavalry begin unloading horses, unlike anything most Irish warriors had ever encountered. Massive bows, steel helmets, disciplined infantry, stone castle builders. At first, they are simply hired soldiers. Their mission seems straightforward: restore one king, collect their reward, return home. But history has a habit of refusing to follow anyone's plans. The campaign succeeded beyond expectation. Strongbow captured key settlements. Norman influence expanded. More soldiers arrived. Then came something Diarmait almost certainly never intended. King Henry II himself crossed into Ireland, establishing direct English royal involvement that would reshape the island for centuries. One decision, one alliance, one desperate king trying to recover his throne. The consequences echoed through nearly 800 years of history. It is one of the greatest examples anywhere in medieval Europe of how a single political crisis can change the destiny of an entire nation. If your surname is MacMurrough, or Kavanagh, whose royal branch descended from the same dynasty, your family name is forever linked with one of the defining turning points in Irish history. Yet while Leinster became associated with political transformation, another dynasty quietly built its reputation by protecting something even more valuable than territory: knowledge itself. Deep in the Irish Midlands stood one of Europe's greatest centers of learning. Centuries before Oxford reached its height, before Cambridge became world famous, before many of Europe's universities even existed, scholars traveled to this monastery to study. Its libraries became legendary. Its manuscripts would preserve civilization through generations of war. And standing beside that remarkable place was the next family on our list. Number 9 is Molloy. Known in Gaelic as O Maolmhuaid, the Molloys ruled the kingdom of Fursall in what is now County Offaly. Although never among Ireland's largest kingdoms, Fursall occupied an important position between competing powers. Whoever ruled there stood at the crossroads between several major provinces, but geography alone does not explain why historians still remember the Molloys. Their lasting legacy lies beside the River Shannon. There stands Clonmacnoise. Founded in the 6th century by St. Cyran, Clonmacnoise became one of medieval Europe's greatest centers of learning. Imagine approaching the monastery shortly after sunrise. Mist rises gently above the Shannon. Round towers emerge through the morning fog. Monks quietly cross stone pathways carrying freshly copied manuscripts. Young scholars arrive from distant kingdoms after weeks of travel. Inside candlelit scriptoria, scribes carefully decorate pages that will survive for over 1,000 years. Outside those walls, however, Ireland remains dangerous. Viking raiders strike without warning. Rival kingdoms compete for influence. Political alliances shift constantly. Yet Clonmacnoise survives, not by accident. Families like the Molloys understood that defending knowledge mattered just as much as defending territory. Books could preserve a civilization long after kingdoms disappeared. And remarkably, they did. Many of Ireland's earliest histories survive today because monasteries like Clonmacnoise continued protecting learning through centuries of uncertainty. If your surname is Molloy, your family name may connect you not only to rulers of Fursall, but to one of the greatest centers of scholarship anywhere in medieval Europe. By now, perhaps you've noticed something remarkable. Not every great Irish surname belonged to a conquering king. Some defended mountain passes, some preserved ancient manuscripts, some advised rulers, some commanded armies. Together, they reveal a civilization far more sophisticated than many people imagine. And we've only reached the halfway point, because the next 6 surnames include dynasties that produced high kings, commanded elite warriors, defeated invading armies, and left genetic footprints that researchers can still detect more than 15 centuries later. One surname in particular may connect to one of the largest paternal lineages ever identified in European history. But before we uncover that remarkable story, we have to travel north, to a kingdom where resistance became a way of life. The kingdom was Tir Égain, the great heartland of Ulster, where rolling drumlin hills stretched toward dark forests, rivers carved natural frontiers through the countryside, and every road seemed to lead toward one family, the O'Neills. Few surnames carry greater historical weight than O'Neill. For centuries, they stood at the center of Gaelic power in Northern Ireland, claiming descent from one of the most famous figures in Irish tradition, Niall of the Nine Hostages. Whether every detail surrounding Niall belongs to history or legend has been debated for generations. Medieval chroniclers blended fact with tradition in ways that modern historians approach carefully. But one thing is beyond dispute. The dynasty that claimed his name became one of the most influential ruling houses Ireland ever produced. Their influence extended across much of Ulster for nearly 1,000 years. To understand just how powerful they became, imagine arriving at Tullyhogue, the ceremonial inauguration site of the O'Neill kings. There are no glittering European palaces here, no towering cathedrals, no golden throne. Instead, nobles gather beneath open skies around an ancient stone that has witnessed countless generations of rulers. Warriors stand silently beside their clan banners. Poets prepare to recite genealogies stretching back centuries. Churchmen offer blessings. Representatives of allied families watch closely. The new ruler steps forward. He places his foot upon the inauguration stone. With that single act, he accepts not only authority but responsibility. He becomes guardian of the land, protector of the people, an heir to generations whose names have already become legend. For the people watching, this ceremony means something profound. The kingdom continues. Long before the concept of a united Irish nation existed, the O'Neills had become symbols of continuity itself. Throughout the Middle Ages, they resisted rival kingdoms, negotiated with foreign rulers, forged strategic alliances, and repeatedly emerged as the dominant power in Ulster. English monarchs understood a difficult truth. Whoever wished to control Ireland would eventually have to confront the O'Neills. That confrontation reached its greatest intensity during the closing years of the 16th century. At its center stood Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, a man educated within both Gaelic and English traditions, a diplomat, a strategist, a soldier. Recognizing that no single Irish lord could defeat England alone, Hugh spent years building alliances among Gaelic rulers across Ulster and beyond. The result became known as the 9 Years' War. It was the greatest coordinated resistance the English crown had yet faced in Ireland. One battle changed everything. The Battle of Yellow Ford. Imagine marching through dense woodland on a humid August morning. English soldiers advance confidently along narrow tracks. Supply wagons creak through marshy ground. Officers expect another routine campaign. Hidden beyond the trees, thousands of Gaelic warriors wait patiently. Then the silence breaks. Musket fire erupts. War cries echo through the forest. Spearmen surge from concealed positions. Panic spreads along the English line. Within hours, one of England's largest armies in Ireland has suffered a devastating defeat. News of Yellow Ford traveled across Europe. For a moment, it appeared entirely possible that Gaelic Ireland might survive. Although the war ultimately ended in defeat, Hugh O'Neill's resistance transformed him into one of the defining figures of Irish history. His departure during the Flight of the Earls in 1607 symbolized far more than one family's exile. To many historians, it marked the end of the old Gaelic political order, yet remarkably, the surname never disappeared. Today, millions of people still carry the name O'Neill across Ireland, Britain, North America, Australia, and far beyond. The kingdom vanished. The dynasty lost its lands. The name survived. If your surname is O'Neill, you carry one of the most historically significant names anywhere in Ireland. But while the O'Neills ruled kingdoms, the next family became famous because they fought for them, not occasionally, professionally. Number 7 is MacSweeney. Known in Gaelic as MacSweeney, the MacSweeneys remind us that medieval Ireland was connected to a much larger Gaelic world stretching across the Irish Sea. Their earliest ancestors came from the Hebrides in western Scotland, before major branches established themselves in Ulster during the 13th century. They did not arrive as ordinary settlers. They came as warriors, elite warriors, known throughout Ireland as the Gallowglass. Imagine seeing them for the first time. They are taller than many local soldiers, broad-shouldered, protected by chain mail that glitters beneath gray northern skies. Across one shoulder rests a massive two-handed Sparth axe capable of splitting shields and armor alike. Their discipline is immediately obvious. These are not part-time fighters called away from farming. They are professional soldiers. Kings hire them because few men fight with greater determination. The MacSweeneys became one of the most respected Gallowglass dynasties in Ireland. Several branches settled in Donegal, where they served the powerful O'Donnell rulers of Tir Chonaill. Their castles overlooked strategic valleys. Their warriors defended mountain passes. Their commanders advised kings before campaigns. Generation after generation, they remained indispensable. What makes their story especially fascinating is what it reveals about medieval Ireland itself. Many people imagine the Irish Sea separating Ireland and Scotland. For Gaelic families, it often did the opposite. It connected them. Ideas crossed constantly. Trade crossed constantly. Marriage alliances crossed constantly. Warriors crossed constantly. The sea functioned less like a border than a busy highway linking two deeply connected Gaelic societies. If your surname is MacSweeney or Sweeney, your family name may preserve the legacy of one of the most respected military traditions in medieval Ireland. Yet not every famous dynasty earned its reputation through warfare. Some ruled because geography placed them at the center of almost every political struggle. Every army marching north or west had to consider their territory. Every alliance affected their future. Every conflict eventually reached their borders. Number 6 is O'Rourke. The Gaelic O Ruairs ruled the kingdom of Breifne, covering much of today's counties Leitrim and Cavan. Look at a map and its importance becomes obvious. Breifne sat between Connacht and Ulster. Control those roads and you influenced movement across much of Northern Ireland. Lose them, and neighboring kingdoms could threaten your own. Because of this strategic position, the O'Rourkes became deeply involved in the complicated politics that defined medieval Ireland. Sometimes they fought beside neighboring rulers, sometimes against them. Sometimes they acted as mediators, sometimes as rivals. Few dynasties understood the delicate balance of power better. Their most famous ruler, Tigernán Ua Ruairc, occupies one of the most controversial chapters in Irish history. His conflict with Diarmait MacMurrough has often been simplified into a dramatic personal story involving the abduction of Tigernán's wife, Derb Forgail. Modern historians urge caution. The reality almost certainly involved wider political rivalries, shifting alliances, and territorial disputes that had been developing for years. Yet the dispute became one thread in a much larger crisis, one that eventually contributed to the chain of events leading toward the Norman intervention. History rarely changes because of one decision. It changes because dozens of smaller decisions collide. The O'Rourkes stood directly at one of those collision points. If your surname is O'Rourke or Rourke, your family name is associated with one of Ireland's most strategically important kingdoms, where politics could prove every bit as dangerous as warfare. By now, you may have noticed something remarkable. Each surname we've explored reveals a different kind of power. The O'Flahertys mastered geography. The O'Dailys mastered memory. The MacMurroughs shaped political history. The Molloys protected learning. The O'Neills built kingdoms. The MacSweeneys perfected warfare. The O'Rourkes navigated diplomacy. Together, they paint a picture of medieval Ireland far richer than the simplified stories many of us learned growing up. But the final 5 surnames take us even deeper. One belonged to the last great high king before Ireland entered a completely new age. Another ruled the storm-battered northwest with extraordinary resilience. Another became one of the most widespread surnames in Irish history. And the final 2 names connect not only to medieval chronicles, but to discoveries made by genetic researchers nearly 1,000 years later. Those extraordinary stories are next. The next surname belonged to a dynasty that stood at the very edge of 2 worlds. Behind them lay the old Gaelic order, with its kings, poets, monasteries, and provincial kingdoms. Ahead of them stood a new Ireland shaped by Norman castles, English intervention, and centuries of political change. Few families better represent that moment than the O'Connors. Known in Gaelic as O Conquest, the O'Connors ruled the Kingdom of Connacht, one of Ireland's 5 great provincial overkingdoms. Their authority stretched across broad western plains, fertile farmland, and important routes connecting inland Ireland to the Atlantic coast. Unlike smaller dynasties, whose influence rarely extended beyond their immediate neighbors, the O'Connors regularly shaped politics across the entire island. Among them emerged one ruler whose reign marked the closing chapter of an era, Ruaidrí Ua Conquest. History remembers him as the last High King of Ireland to exercise meaningful authority over much of the island before the Norman invasion transformed everything. Imagine Ireland during the middle of the 12th century. Messengers ride across muddy roads carrying news between kingdoms. Monks continue copying ancient manuscripts inside quiet monasteries. Kings negotiate alliances that may last months or collapse within days. At the center of this complicated political world stands Raedry. He inherited a country held together not by one government, but by delicate balances of loyalty, diplomacy, military strength, and tradition. For a brief moment, it almost worked. Then history accelerated. Within only a few years, Diarmait MacMurrough sought foreign military assistance. Norman forces arrived. New castles appeared. Power shifted. The Ireland Raedry had spent his life trying to govern slowly disappeared. It is difficult to imagine the frustration he must have felt. Not because he failed to defend a single kingdom, because he witnessed an entire political system beginning to unravel. If your surname is O'Connor, Connor, or one of its historic branches, your family name remains closely associated with one of the final great royal houses of pre-Norman Ireland. But while the O'Connors watched the political landscape change, another dynasty continued fighting from one of the most rugged corners of the island. Their homeland lay among mountains, deep valleys, rocky coastlines, and powerful Atlantic storms. Invading armies rarely enjoyed campaigning there. That was exactly how its rulers preferred it. Number 4 is O'Donnell. The Gaelic O'Donoghnael ruled Tir Chonail, centered largely in what is now County Donegal. Few kingdoms possessed stronger natural defenses. Steep mountains overlooked narrow passes. Fast-flowing rivers cut through valleys. The Atlantic Ocean protected the western coast, while difficult terrain slowed every invading army approaching from the south. The O'Donnells understood their homeland better than anyone. Again and again they defended it against rival dynasties, Norman expansion, and eventually the growing military power of Tudor England. Their greatest hero was Red Hugh O'Donnell. His story sounds almost too dramatic to be true. Captured while still a teenager, he was imprisoned inside Dublin Castle, one of the strongest fortifications in Ireland. For many prisoners, escape would have seemed impossible, not for Hugh. During the bitter winter of 1592, he escaped alongside several companions under cover of darkness. Imagine climbing down cold castle walls while guards patrol only yards away. Every sound matters. Every shadow matters. The freezing December air cuts through soaked clothing. Once outside the city, the journey becomes even more dangerous. Snow blankets the Wicklow Mountains. Food is scarce. English search parties scour the countryside. Some companions die from exposure before reaching safety. Yet somehow Hugh survives. That extraordinary escape transformed him into a living symbol of Gaelic resistance long before he ever commanded an army. Years later, he joined forces with Hugh O'Neill during the 9 Years' War, helping lead one of the most determined military campaigns Ireland had ever witnessed. His courage became legendary not simply because he fought, because he refused to surrender. If your surname is O'Donnell or Donnell, your family name echoes one of the greatest stories of resilience in Irish history. At this point, another pattern begins to emerge. These dynasties did not exist in isolation. The O'Neills and O'Donnells fought together. The MacSweeneys served the O'Donnells. The O'Rourkes negotiated between kingdoms. The O'Connors competed for the high kingship. Together they formed a network of alliances, rivalries, marriages, and loyalties that shaped Ireland for centuries. And among those ancient kingdoms, one royal house quietly became one of the most enduring of them all. Number 3 is O'Kelly. Today, Kelly is among the most common Irish surnames anywhere in the world. Millions carry it. Yet relatively few know that the name is closely associated with the ancient kingdom of Uí Main, stretching across parts of modern Galway and Roscommon. Unlike many kingdoms that collapsed rapidly following the Norman arrival, Uí Main displayed remarkable resilience. Its rulers adapted when necessary, negotiated when advantageous, resisted when required. Rather than disappearing overnight, they preserved their identity across generations while much of Ireland changed around them. The dynasty also became great patrons of learning. One of Ireland's most important medieval manuscripts, the Book of Uí Main, survives today because families associated with this kingdom valued history enough to preserve it. Think about that. Almost every kingdom on this list defended itself with warriors. The O'Kellys also defended themselves with memory. Without those manuscripts, much of what historians know about Western Ireland might have disappeared forever. If your surname is Kelly or O'Kelly, your family name may preserve the memory of one of Connacht's longest surviving royal dynasties. Now we arrive at perhaps the most famous royal surname in Irish history, a name recognized almost everywhere Irish communities settled. A dynasty whose greatest ruler became a symbol not only of Munster, but of Ireland itself. Number 2 is O'Brien. The Gaelic O'Brien means descendant of Brian. That Brian was Brian Boru. Few historical figures occupy such a powerful place within Irish memory. Born into the Dallglass dynasty of Munster during the 10th century, Brian gradually transformed himself from regional ruler into the most influential king Ireland had seen for generations. He achieved this not through one spectacular victory alone. He built alliances. He negotiated. He defeated rivals. He strengthened his kingdom. He understood that political power required patience as much as courage. Everything eventually led toward one unforgettable day, the Battle of Clontarf. Many people know it simply as Ireland's great victory over the Vikings. Modern historians present a more nuanced picture. Irish and Norse forces fought on both sides, reflecting the complicated political landscape of the time. Yet one truth remains. Clontarf permanently secured Brian's reputation as one of Ireland's greatest rulers. Picture dawn breaking outside Dublin. Thousands of warriors assemble beneath fluttering banners. Priests move quietly through the ranks, offering blessings. Axes strike shields. War horns echo across the bay. Then the armies advance. By sunset, the battlefield has changed Ireland forever. Brian himself dies shortly after the victory. His death transforms him into something larger than a successful king. He becomes a symbol. Generation after generation looked back upon Brian Boru as proof that Irish kingdoms could unite when circumstances demanded it. His descendants continued ruling Thomond for centuries. His reputation never faded. If your surname is O'Brien or Brian, your family name carries one of the greatest royal legacies in Irish history. And finally, we arrive at the surname that perhaps best reminds us why history should always remain open to new discoveries, because this story does not end with medieval chronicles. It reaches into modern laboratories, into DNA research, into genetics. Number one is O'Neill. Yes, we encountered the O'Neills earlier, but they return here for one important reason. No other Irish dynasty has inspired as much discussion among geneticists. For centuries, medieval genealogists claimed the powerful northern dynasties descended from Niall of the Nine hostages. Many historians regarded those claims cautiously, recognizing that medieval royal genealogies often blended history with political tradition. Then researchers studying Y chromosome DNA made a remarkable discovery. A distinctive paternal lineage appears at unusually high frequencies across northwestern Ireland. It is also found disproportionately among surnames historically connected with the Uí Nael dynasties, including O'Neill, O'Donnell, Gallagher, Doherty, Cannon, and several others. What does that prove? Not that every man carrying one of those surnames descends directly from the historical Niall. DNA cannot establish that level of certainty. But it does strongly suggest that an exceptionally successful male lineage expanded dramatically from this region over many centuries. In other words, medieval tradition may have preserved more historical truth than many once believed. It is one of those extraordinary moments when archaeology, history, genealogy, and genetics begin telling remarkably similar stories. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden inside every surname we've explored today. These names are not magical. They do not guarantee royal ancestry. They cannot replace careful genealogical research. But they are genuine historical artifacts. They preserve memories of kingdoms that vanished from maps, of monasteries where scholars protected civilization, of warriors who defended mountain passes, of rulers who negotiated, conquered, resisted, and sometimes changed history forever. The castles may have fallen into ruin. The inauguration stones may stand weathered beneath open skies. The kingdoms themselves may have disappeared almost 1,000 years ago. Yet every time someone introduces themselves as O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Donnell, O'Connor, Kelly, MacMurrough, MacSweeney, O'Rourke, Molloy, O'Daly, O'Flaherty, or one of the countless related families scattered across the world, those ancient kingdoms live again. Perhaps not politically, but culturally, historically, and emotionally. Empires tried to erase much of the Gaelic world. Wars destroyed monasteries, plantations confiscated ancestral lands. The Great Famine forced millions to leave the island forever. Ships sailed from Cork, Galway, Belfast, and Dublin carrying families who believed they might never see Ireland again. Many left with little more than a few possessions, but they carried one thing no empire could confiscate: their name. That single inheritance crossed oceans. It reached Liverpool, Glasgow, London, Boston, New York, Toronto, Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, Cape Town, and countless other places where Irish communities built new lives while quietly preserving memories of the old one. So if your surname appeared in today's documentary, tell us in the comments where your family is today, and if you know it, where in Ireland your story began. Your family history may inspire a future episode of UK Bloodlines. And if your surname was not on today's list, don't worry. Ireland has hundreds of remarkable family names, each with its own extraordinary journey through history. Many deserve documentaries of their own, and we'll be exploring them in future episodes. If you enjoyed this journey into Ireland's forgotten kingdoms, please leave a like, subscribe to UK Bloodlines, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story hidden inside the names we carry. Because sometimes the oldest map of your ancestry isn't drawn on parchment, it isn't carved into stone, it isn't stored inside a museum. It's the surname you've spoken your entire life without ever realizing it once belonged to a kingdom.